when you've chosen to abandon the service of the Emperor and align yourself with McFarlane. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys, Warhammer 40,000, the gold label Chaos Space Marines Iron Warrior. Originally the 4th Space Marine Legion, the Iron Warriors fell into ruinous powers during the Horus Heresy 10 millennia ago, fighting an endless war against the Imperium. They were renowned and feared as specialists in attrition to siege warfare. They advanced like grinding war machine, metal and munitions marching forward beneath the icon of the Iron Skull, one that strikes fear into the most stalwart defenders. Much like the Marines, you gotta keep moving forward. And we're gonna move forward with this review by grabbing the tape measure, of course, to see how tall the Warhammer 40,000 gold label collection Chaos Space Marines Iron Warriors stands. While I'm doing this as well, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that were kind enough to provide the figure we're about to have a look at. The Iron Warrior, though, is going to stand 7 inches in height, or the Chaos Space Marine is 17.5 centimeters tall. I have a couple of Warhammer 40,000 figures I can bring in for comparisons, all of which, by the way, we have looked at on the channel if you need to play a little bit of catch-up. Here's what the figure, first of all, looks like with the Blood Angels Reaver Sergeant. Comparing him then with a pretty big boy, here's what the figure looks like with the Ultramarines Terminator. A figure that, though, resembles very similar to the Iron Warrior. Here's what the figure looks like with the World Eater's Khorne Berserker. And, of course, here's what the figure also looks like with the Space Wolves Wolf Guard. As is always the case when we look at 40,000 figure releases from McFarlane's team, things you'll expect to see with these figures are always quite a lot of weapons, which I've just got them kind of grouped off to the side here. Of course, you get yourself as well a backpack that's going to plug onto the back of the figure's body, but you get also as well a trading card and display stand. Looking, though, first at the card, it's kind of really hard to make out what's exactly going on here. They've taken the idea of what you'll see in a second on his shoulder, of alternating yellow and black. Unfortunately, though, it kind of just masks what exactly is going on in the front of the card. If you look at it, you kind of see that there's some scene going on here, but then they unfortunately just cover it over with the black, so it's kind of really hard to make things out. It's a little easier, though, to make out exactly what's going on for the read-up. The Iron Warrior, if you wanted to pause and read for yourself, about 2 paragraphs worth. I've also already beaten you to it. I read it at the beginning of this review. I'll be putting this along with the recently looked at Chaos Space Marines Iron Warrior. In fact, I have a whole dedicated sheet inside my binder for all my Warhammer 40,000 figures. I think we've, again, looked at, 5, 6, so I'm still keeping it onto one sheet. When it goes after that, I'm going to have to probably go to a second sheet, because I don't know how you guys like to display all your cards inside of trading card sheets. Do you like to put them front to back? You know, so essentially you'd have like one card on one side, and then, of course, the card would be on the other side. Or do you like to have it in such a way when you flip it over, you can read up all the other statistics? Usually I'll always have to, unfortunately, keep all my extra cards inside of boxes, because I never like to double things up. I always like to get the chance to be able to see what exactly is going on in the back of the cards, especially if it's a read-up. If you're going to take the time to put a read-up on the back, I'm going to take the time as well to have them with their own dedicated slots. That's enough of that. Figure, of course, yes, comes included with a trading card or display stand. We already looked at the trading card. Display stand is all, again, a circular black display stand with, of course, the peg off to the far corner. When you get a big, bulky figure like this, it's always really good to have these on the ready. Of course, when it comes to displaying these on the shelf, I have all my figures so far, the 5 or 6 or so, all displayed with their display stands. And again, I love the fact that at least with these, you get a Warhammer printing down below. Psst, that the team, of course, at Todd's McFarlane teams decide to, of course, print that down below. So again, even though they are using still the same display stand, when you're at least displaying them on the shelf, it's nice to at least know what line they're coming from. Move that off to the side. As already mentioned, the figure comes included with a backpack. The thing I love all the things that come included, first of all, with the Iron Warrior. There is certainly like an over-the-top design for all of these, and kind of things, we get a chance to kind of start things off here with the backpack. The backpack, for all intents and purposes, I mean, if you were just looking at that, it would be really no different than, I don't know, like, for example, the Khorne Berserker. I just happen to have one right here. I mean, if you're looking at the two, they're very similar. These also, I think, serve as jetpacks. But the one thing that's different, really, and one thing you'll kind of see when we look at a lot of the features here for the figure, is that they take a lot of cues here from, like, the World Eaters, for example. But, like, if you're looking at the backpacks, I mean, this part right here looks very similar to this part right here. The thing that they've done differently, though, is with the Chaos Space Marines. Look at these cool-looking skulls that they've got on the ends here. Painted nicely here as well in gold. The gold motif is something you'll see commonly when we look at the rest of the suit of the figure. It also plugs in the exact same way as the World Eaters, and really, for that matter, all the other Warhammer 40,000 figures all essentially plug the backpacks on the exact same way. So you see there's like a rectangular peg right here. If you look at the back of the figure, though, yeah, you're going to have a slot on the back. Kind of looks like you can slide down bread to toast it. But you're just going to take this. It's one of the easier backpacks, honestly, to fit in place. Generally, I always seem to have to struggle to really put a lot of pressure on these to get them attached and lodged onto the torso. Didn't have to work at all when it came to the Space Marine. It plugged actually in pretty good in place. The figure also comes included with quite a lot of weapons. I guess maybe the first thing we'll have a look at is his blade. This blade looks mean, like it's going to do some business. I love the way it's hooked on the end. Can you just imagine that would impale into armor and just leave a big mark behind? Of course, he can't fit this into either one of his hands. It still is obviously the struggle with these harder plastic hands. It's always a tough time to try to get them inside their grips. At least, though, for the sword, there's one other place where you can store the blade. If you look at the front of it, actually, he's got himself not necessarily a dedicated sheath, but he has like a little loop right here. You see that? If I get my finger out of the way, okay. Right there, right there. Just take the blade, and it slides right in. It's a hard thing to kind of get it around this hook, but once you get it around the hook, it's smooth sailing. And it just basically just droops onto the side, and basically he would just retrieve it. It's just as hard as pulling this out, because obviously you're going to have to get this around the little hook. So you just have to kind of have to tilt it almost even on an angle. But the blade is honestly not the easiest thing at all to retrieve. If it wasn't for just the thing I finished saying that I like so much about the blade, if it wasn't for that little hook piece, it would be a whole lot easier to remove the blade. Let's just get it around this. The reason why, by the way, I'm removing this is just because I know when I'm moving the figure around. I mean, I could probably already tell you, if you start to move the things like the torso around, and we looked at the articulation for a second, and that's going to be down the road, obviously, in this review, I'm just going to only have to worry about a handle of this blade being in the way. So let's just... I assure you, I had a lot easier of a time removing this earlier, but of course, the moment I hit record, let's get that around there. At least it's, if anything, it's softer plastic. But again, like it's a hard thing, as you probably can already see, to get the blade back out of it. If they had only just made it a little bit bigger, that's all it really needed. Because if ultimately, though, I mean, this is, by the way, pretty soft and plastic. To try to pull this out, what I usually end up just doing is I end up pulling down the blade. Well, why am I again? You know what? Can I pull? No, I can't pull it down the other way. Bear with me again. Like, I only just really want to remove this so we can move forward with the rest of this review. But again, like, it seems to be I'm all thumbs this time around. When all else fails, sometimes you just need to pause the camera. Anyways, we've removed the blade. Let's just put down the figure for right now and look at the remaining accessories. The figure comes included with a bolt pistol. One thing I really like about these is that when we just want to bring out the other figure's accessory, I just happen to have Reverse Sergeant's accessories right here. See, though, how it's pretty clean of a finish here for the silver. One thing I really, though, like about the Chaos Space Marines guns is the fact that they all kind of look more aged. There's definitely a lot more, not I would say rusted look to it, but there's definitely a darker approach for the gray. And I think it works a lot better. You know, kind of, again, looking at these, I kind of wish that just across the board, all the other Warhammer 40,000 figures will all kind of more approach their guns, kind of a more darker color like this. But you get yourself the bolt pistol, which again looks really nice. Just to show you guys what that looks like. Pew, pew. I don't want to point that towards anybody. You get also as well a mace. And again, like, everything really has a more futuristic look to it. I mean, simply, they could have just given a handle piece and then a big balling thing on the end of it that would just look like it would inflict damage. But they really, again, make it super, super cool looking. I mean, again, it just kind of looks like a more futuristic looking thing. A nice little close combat melee weapon that he can hold in his hands. By the way, though, while I did have a struggle to get the blade into the little holster, I guess more so to get that removed, none of the other accessories that we're looking at right now can store anywhere else on the figure's body. There's no other storage spots. The figure also comes included with this. Now, I was trying to figure out what exactly this is. It is either an Umbra Ferox, Ferox pattern bolt gun that just happens to have the blade attachment on the end of it, or is it a Phobos pattern combi melta with combat blade? Either way, though, I mean, it's a nice looking weapon. It's obviously a darker gray here, and then, of course, they've added the blade down below here. It kind of does, certainly, though, resemble more like a flamethrower than it does a bolt gun. So I think it's actually more of Phobos. You can let me know down below in the comments section. Somebody's a little bit more versed in Warhammer 40,000 than perhaps the person behind the camera. But it does overall look good. I mean, it's probably my go-to weapon of choice when it comes to displaying the figure. But again, like, the problems with all of these is the fact that the plastic for these hands is always really hard. Definitely would recommend, if you're having a struggle to get these into his hands, just heat the plastic on the hands first. Or you can do what I'm doing right now. I've already heated these, but all the time of actually talking about things and trying to remove a blade from the front of his torso, the plastic has cooled. One thing at least I can say about the Chaos Space Marines, if you have been following the exploits of this guy, trying to look at the Warhammer 40,000 figures, is just, again, bring back in this figure for the example. The World Eaters and all the other figures seem to have loose shoulders. I tried to go in there, in fact, try to tighten these up. I took a little bit of floor polish. I don't know if you guys can actually see it or not. I tried to go in there and tighten it up. I don't know if there's an easier way to tighten up joints. If there is, you guys can let me know down below. At least the thing about the Chaos Space Marine is that he doesn't seem to have tight shoulders, or it doesn't seem to have loose shoulders. I mean, in fact, if you have, for example, this gun, it looks like he can hold it pretty good. Normally, by now, the arm would just start to droop down. Not only does it have the bulk of the shoulder pads on the sides for his arms, but also with the weight of the plastic for the guns, they seem to wreak havoc on these poor shoulders of these figures, that a lot of times the arms just start to go like this. And actually, both cases, the arms seem pretty tight on these. Let's go ahead and just remove the gun for right now. We'll put it off to the side. And I guess we can kind of keep the backpack on. Do we want to remove it? No, we'll keep it on. We'll keep it on. Getting, though, a closer look at the head sculpt here for the Chaos Space Marines. You know, again, I keep bringing back in the World Eaters as the example, because it does have a very similar style of face mask. Instead of actually having the prongs on the top, though, you can see that the Iron Warrior now has sort of curved front-forward horns. That really adds an appeal to the character. I mean, but overall, like, again, looking at the bodies, they are very, very similarly designed. Shoulder pads also, too. I mean, the only thing very much different here is this one does have, again, the alternate colors of the yellow and the black. But all this additional trimming of gold, not to mention all these spikes that stick out the sides, it's a really cool-looking armor. Something you'd almost even expect to see in Mad Max. Although if they're battling out in the desert, you would imagine this poor guy walking around, though, would be just exhausted by the heat alone. The head sculpt, though, again, is really my favorite of, so far, what we've looked at from Warhammer 40,000. Between the front of the face mask here with a little breathing grill, not to mention the horns that he has on the sides, it's just such a cool design on the character. You got a nice little skull there on the front. Everything really on this figure, and it may have also something to do with the fact that this falls within the gold label collection parameters, that they maybe just went above and beyond the regular paint jobs that these 40,000 figures normally would get. It just seems like they've gone a lot more into painting this figure than other figures have gotten in the past. So again, you've got some nice little gold there on the front for the skull. You've got some nice spice sticking out the sides for the shoulders. We've already looked at the fact he's got these cool little skulls sticking on the sides of the backpack, but just there's a lot to kind of take in here. He's got some skull motifs. My favorite thing about the figure not only is, of course, the face, but also down below here, this one leg. The way they've guarded the front of his calf plate here, they've got this, looks like an open skull mouth. Just looks super cool. Doesn't limit at all the articulation on the figure, but I feel like, again, they just went all out when it came to painting his character, that maybe perhaps the other Warhammer 40,000 figures weren't given as much love, maybe necessarily. But for the figure's articulation, even though really he does pack a lot more paint, his articulation pretty much is going to be the exact same as all the other 40,000 figures. So, like, for example, his head's going to be on a ball joint. Because he doesn't have anything really in the way of things like his shoulders, you can easily rotate the head all the way around. The head looks up and it looks down. One thing I did kind of overlook, and I hope to fix things when we got to the end of the review for the Reaver Sergeant, is that the inside of the torso, so like see this little black piece right here, the head's going to basically be on a ball joint that attaches onto that. But then that also has its own dedicated articulation. So I don't know if you guys can actually see, if again I get my fingers out of the way, there looks to be probably pegs on both sides of this circular plate that then allows the head to go a little bit lower down when it comes to its reach. It also goes a lot higher up too, because it's also rocking back and forth on this circular bit of plastic. So it gives a little bit of additional articulation. And again, like if you have a more low look to the head sculpt, it kind of gets then lost behind the armor piece. I just really like that they included that additional piece of posability. For the arms, now the arms are going to be a little bit more limited, even though the shoulders really are on their own ball joints, but they're attached right here. Because they're so close in quarters, you can only really bring the arms out at about 45 degrees. The arms at least can rotate all the way around, and that's even with the inclusion of the backpack on its torso. You can still fully rotate the arms. This one even rotates also all the way around, even though it's a little bit larger of a backpack, or a lot larger of a shoulder pad. For the arms themselves, they do swivel back and forth. There's also a double hinge on the elbow, which again, like for the size of these characters, really impressed that they still managed to pack a double hinge in the elbows. The hands also as well rotate all the way around. The upper torso is on a ball joint. It's a little on the stiff side for mine at least, but again, I would much rather tight joints on these figures than overly loose. Upper torso ball joint. Further down from that, the figure also has an abdomen ball joint, so that rotates there as well. The legs do split out. You can see that he's got also a skirting here on the front. That's pretty much a soft plastic that they've utilized here. But again, like that's not going to limit at all the articulation. So the figure's legs split about that far. You can take them, move them forward. You can move them back. There's a swivel at the top, more so for the assembly of the figure. There's a double hinge on the knees. And even when you hinge the knees, you can see, like, I love how this piece of the knee piece, the kneecap, sticks up like this. Especially if you're going to have it in a pretty cool looking stance. The skull then stands out a lot more than it did before. Love that. Just love that. Such a cool looking design. And again, when it comes to the ball joints, now he's got it here as well for his ankles. They rock back and forth this way. They hinge up and down this way. And the figure also has toe articulation as well. Both sides. Once again, you got peg holes in the bottoms of the feet. I would always really recommend when it comes to displaying any of the Warhammer 40,000 figures, just because of the size of these characters. It's always really good, especially, I mean, if you're always just going to have them displayed standing like this, you're probably not going to have a problem. I try to, though, jazz things up when you wrap up these reviews, that I either have them in somewhat of a running pose or even a walking pose. Can't quite be pulled off unless you just happen to have one of these bad boys, which again, I always have these on the ready, either whether I'm displaying or reviewing McFarlane toy figure reviews, or even I just like to have extra McFarlane stands on the side. They always really come in handy, even when I'm looking at other figure companies as well, other figure companies that don't happen to sell their figures with display stands. McFarlane is one of the few companies out there that still continue to pack display stands with all of their figures, all of them across the board, and you got to commend them for that. At the end of it, though, sliding over the Chaos Space Marines, bringing back in, though, the World Eater's Khorne Berserker. You know, again, there's a lot of similarities going on, really, between the two designs' armor. Obviously, some substantial tooling had to go into place, changing from one to the other. I mean, obviously, it's not just a straight carbon copy. You can kind of, though, see that there are some similar mold elements. Like the arms, for example, are the same arms, like, for example, that were on the Khorne Berserker. The lower legs, not the actual parts from the knees down, but like the thigh areas are exactly the same molds, and they probably have used, again, like a lot of the abdomen areas, but again, like some substantial retooling had to come into place in order for the new Chaos Space Marines Iron Warrior to exist. And at the end of it, he's a nice looking figure. At the end of it, he actually might be my favorite of the Warhammer 40,000 figures we've looked at so far. Of the ones we certainly have looked at, they always have, I felt, not delivered exactly in paint. And maybe it had something to do with the fact that the Iron Warrior was part of the gold label collection, that he just gets, again, granted some additional paint. The end result, though, is one of the best figures we've looked at so far. Coincidentally enough, we're just talking about display stands a moment ago, and I'm using the display stand that came included with the Chaos Space Marine to wrap up the review for the Iron Warrior. The figure, though, could, in theory, be displayed without one. I mean, the posability and the large size of his feet could accommodate the figure being posed without the use of a display stand, but the fact that McFarlane's team includes one and you're dealing with a big bulky figure, why not just use it anyways? The figure's pose can be pulled off with some decent, surprising articulation. In fact, all of the Warhammer 40,000 figures have impressed me with the amount of posability that they possess. The only limitations are obviously going to be in the shoulders. You're either having to contend with overly loose arms, which luckily wasn't the case here with the Chaos Space Marine, or you have to have the limitations of where the arms can't completely come out just because the shoulder pads are going to get in the way of things. I don't think most people are probably going to be displaying any of their figures with their arms doing jumping jacks, but if you did want to, you're not going to be able to do it as well here with the Iron Warrior. The figure is decently detailed. I mean, that's kind of diminishing it. The figure is incredibly detailed from head to toe. And again, it seems like a lot of the budget went into the paint. The sculpting is still good, and it's always really delivered well for these figures that we've looked at. But the paint specifically for the Iron Warrior is a little higher in his own class than all the 40,000 figures we've looked at so far. Of the ones that we have looked at, by far, this one is my favorite. I'm looking forward to putting this one on the shelf with all the other Warhammer figures we've looked at so far. Big thank you once again to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the Warhammer 40,000 Gold Label Collection Chaos Space Marines Iron Warrior. Is this a figure you guys could see yourselves picking up? Let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of it. Also, if you guys did enjoy this video, want to throw it a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and want to stick around for more McFarlane reviews, we may not, though, be looking at any Warhammer 40,000 for the remaining of this week, but we will, though, be looking at other McFarlane toy figures. So make sure you're coming back here on a regular basis. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.